Hi, I'm Dr. Stacy Reuille-Dupont, and I was asked to put some things together for you about my two favorite topics, which is exercise science and psychology. So just a little bit about me before we start. I started my career as an exercise scientist working in health club management, doing things like personal training, fitness director, eventually owning a club. And along the way, a lot of my clients kept crying and are dumping a lot of emotional stuff. And my colleagues would laugh and say, "Your clients are crying." And I would laugh back and say, "And that's when they actually make movement happen, and weight loss happens, and weight gain happens, and their goals are met." So I decided I needed some more skills, and I went back to school for counseling, spending my master's degree studying cognitive therapies, behavior therapies, looking at what we think and what we do, and eventually found myself doing a PhD in clinical psychology with a somatic psychology emphasis. And in somatic psychology, we really take the body. The body has the information, and we honor that information, and we go after it. So soma means living body in Greek, and we don't believe that the mind and body are split. There's not this interface that we have where the two of them come together and then we do things in this mind-body way. Instead, there is no way to pick them apart. They are both and all. So they are one. If I want to check your stress hormones, I can take your saliva. If I want to check your serotonin, I can take your blood. And from there, I really got into studying how physical exercise from my exercise science days really does help our mental health. And I look closely at the microbiome, the endocrine system, how mental health disrupts these things, how physical disruptions of these things creates mental health, and how we can heal them using the body. So one of my favorite ways to do that is looking at physical exercise, as I used to be and still am a personal trainer. I enjoy creating movement patterns that go after now psychological issues. So I blend the two together in some interesting ways in my office. I was asked to put this presentation together. So today we're going to cover some things that look like, we're going to talk about trauma and what trauma does to the body, how that disrupts the body, and then how exercise can come back and help the body out. So one of the first big things to think about is, what is trauma? So we hear that word thrown around a lot. A lot of times it's associated with PTSD, which many people have. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. It happens when we have something scary happen to us and our body gets dysregulated trying to make sure that we survive. It gets stuck and loops in the body. It kind of loops around this trauma stuff. We don't always fit the criteria for PTSD when we still are suffering from trauma responses. So that's something to keep in mind. For some folks, they'll say, well, I have PTSD or I don't. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not looking at trauma anyway. We have what we call big T versus little t traumas. That's not to make that one is bigger or better or worse than the other. It's that big T traumas are events. So they're these things that we have that happen to us that I could say, on this date, I had a car accident, I had an assault, I had a tornado come through and rip my house apart. We were chased out of our village and I had to leave. So these things are events that happen, and they can be all sorts of different things in different categories. These are more relational in nature, and they tend to be the things that we have that happen to us throughout our lifetime. In my opinion, we all have these. For sure we all have these. Many of us have these. These are the limbic system traumas that go after different relationships, and they're things like bullying. They're the tone of voice your mother used to use, the way somebody might be passive aggressive when they talk to you, the manipulation that you felt and or used yourself. They're different things in our relational world that impact us, and we feel like we're not going to belong. And if we don't belong, that's annihilation in the human condition, because we need other humans to survive. It's part of how we build our brain. And so when we have those emotional and relational slights that happen to us, and some of us are more sensitive than others, some of us have experienced a lifetime of those over and over, it impacts us and it gets stuck in the body, and we struggle. When we think about big T versus little t traumas, again, these are going to be events, but these can even be things like negative thinking. And so if I'm constantly telling myself that I'm a horrible person, that I don't matter, that I'm stupid, that I'm an idiot, that what was I thinking anyway, I should have gotten it better, I'm so dumb, those are all little T traumas to ourselves. And we want to make sure that we're changing our our thinking pattern from positive or from negative thinking to positive thinking, because then we can eliminate how we just recapitulate and pile on more traumatic wounding in our brains and in our bodies. When the trauma comes in, part of what happens is, so if we have our little, there's my rendition of the brain, and we have our little body here. So the brain has none of its own inputs. So information comes at us, comes in through our sense organs in the body, and then it shoots up the spinal column and into the brain. And we have, if we think about the brain in 3 different sections in a simplistic way, we have this kind of brainstem area. And that part of us is all about figuring out what's safe, what's not. It's about survival. So what happens is this gets activated and we start to have a lot of maybe fear. Anxiety can live here too, as anxiety is really about fear gone wild. So fear is here, and we start to think, what do I need to do in order to survive? And it begins shutting down these higher order of thinking processes, because we just need to survive. So down here we have things like fighting, fleeing, freezing, and feigning death. And we'll talk about those and what those do in the body in a moment. And then if we look towards more of the middle part of the brain, in here, we have our limbic system. And this is the part of us that makes us mammals, that we share with all other mammals, which is why you know when your dog is happy, when you go to the zoo and you're hanging out with the other mammals, watching them, you kind of know what they're feeling, that kind of thing. You feel like you can communicate with the zoo animals. It's because we're connected and we've got this limbic thing. It's how you know when somebody walks in the room and they're angry. Even when they say, no, I'm not angry, you know by their tone of voice, by their presence of body, because you're picking it up somatically. And that's about safety as well. When we look at these limbic traumas, often related to these little T traumas, what happens is I feel like I'm not going to be part of the pack. If I was an infant, that would kill me. Infants have what we call failure to thrive, and they die from that when they don't have enough social interaction and people aren't taking care of them and there's too much neglect. And so that happens to us. Elderly also, when they don't have enough social interaction, they end up in really struggles with their physical health as well, and some will die from that too. So this makes us mammals, and it keeps us connected to the group. When there's a threat to this, it feels very, very scary. Even though it might not be about death, it might not be that I'm going to be ostracized from the tribe, and because of that I can't get food, and now I have to wander alone in the nothingness of the world, and I'm going to end up being eaten by an animal, I'm going to drown in the river by myself, or I'm not going to be able to have enough food because I can't cook it, kill it, all those things all on my own. I need my tribe to do that. It's not so much like that for many of us anymore. However, we still go through that process of, if I don't belong, then I will therefore be annihilated. And if I'm annihilated, I no longer survive, and it kicks into more fear, right? And then up on the top, we have our higher orders of thinking, our prefrontal cortex, the part of us that makes us primates, and the part of us that makes us humans. This is where we think, it's where we plan, it's where we make judgments, it's the place where I can say, this is what happened to me, and then I can turn around and say, as a result of that, I'm going to plan for this future thing. We don't do that when these are too active. So what happens when I'm in a trauma situation is this takes over. I have too much fear. It's all about survival. I kick these things offline. I don't even need to worry about it. I don't have to think, oh, I think that looks like a mountain lion. I wonder if I should run away from it. Maybe, what if I stood here? You know, in the past, that sort of color has been a dog. Maybe I'm okay. That's not going to keep us surviving if we're using all of that. So we kick it off and we turn just into our fight, flight, freezing, and feigning death just to survive. So once we have determined that we're in trouble, and we begin the process of surviving, we have our 4 F's. So the first thing I will always try to do is flee. We will try to run. We will try to get away. Then we will fight. And these are on the hyper arousal side. So in these states, I have more adrenaline, I have cortisol, I'm ready to fight, my muscles are a little stronger, I can see a little more clearly, I'm thinking in a way that's very focused on what my task is. When these fail, I will turn to the hypo side of life, and I will freeze. And this, think of this not as the door just slammed, but this is, I need to get small. I need to be quiet. I need to have my energy really close to me because I don't want anyone to find me. It would be dangerous if they knew I was in the room, even if I'm in a room full of people. So we're starting to freeze here. We go into what's called a hypo state, and our body begins to slow down. And then if that doesn't work, we'll feign death. And there, it's not like I'm playing death. Oh, let me play dead for the moment. It's really, my body is shutting down systems. I have a little bit of ability to breathe. I can move my eyes slightly just to see enough. And my body truly is starting to shut me down so that I am able to just look like, act like, feel like I'm dead. So that if a bear were to come up to me, or a mountain lion, or another animal that was going to eat me, that they would think I was dead and that they would not want me for their snack. And so these things exist outside of what's called a window of tolerance. And so this is sort of where we act all day long. And we're up and we're down, and we're up and we're down, and we're up and we're down. And that's normal. And so I might have something good happen and I'm excited, or I might have a little bit of stress and I'm excited, and then something clears up, or something else happens that I feel a little bit down about, and I move down. But I stay within this window on my edges. Some of us have a window of tolerance that looks like that. We are very, very narrow, and we are not able to experience life fully because we live in just a very narrow window. We feel a lot of fear. We struggle to take the different way to work every day. We worry a lot. This could be truly, I don't leave my house. I'm not sure what to do. Lots of worrying and fear here. What happens to this window as trauma happens is we begin to narrow it more and more because life is scary. That's part of what trauma has taught us, that our existence in life is scary. And so what'll happen also is we begin this process of tipping out of our window. So as the window narrows, now we begin to have experiences that might look like this. And they're way up and down, right? So I might be escalating up. This feels very dramatic. It can feel very chaotic, often very emotional. If we keep it just in the trauma realm, I'm fighting a lot. There's a lot of angst. There's a lot of me trying to prove my survival. And then when I'm dipping down here, we've got dissociation. Some folks down here might have multiple personalities, things where we're tipping down. And as a result of tipping down, I'm kind of going away. I'm losing time and space. I'm stressed. I can't move. My processes are slowing down. And so often people in these phases, because to come up is really hard on the endocrine system, my endocrine system gets overwhelmed, and then it has to replenish itself, and I just end up in this tipping up and down, up and down, up and down. So sometimes people get called crazy or psychotic or psycho or bipolar because they're going through trauma loops over and over in the body, and people around them aren't understanding what's happening. And when we work on this stuff, which it's very treatable, the sooner that we treat it, the easier that it gets. When we work on it, we really want to be working on it by pressing these edges. So we want to be doing the work here, but while staying in the window. And that's where therapy can be really, really good. We do the work, but the therapist is able to keep you in the window. And over time, what that will do is it will broaden your window out. And now I have a new level of ability to be in the world. So if you're operating here, we just work really slow. Pretty soon your window's here, then here, then here, and we can just broaden it out as we go. One of the things that's hard on the body is that when we go through these cycles over and over, the body and the endocrine system are firing off stress hormones. When there is a lot of stress hormones coursing through the body, it raises inflammation rates. It also helps our immune system decrease its effectiveness. So as the immune system is being overwhelmed by the amount of stress, our inflammation goes up, our ability to fight diseases goes down, and we end up in patterns with physical health being impacted by these mental health situations of trauma and fear. Some of what else that does is, as we have those states in the body, the glucocorticoid hypothesis, vulnerability hypothesis, looks at how those extra stress hormones in the body actually damage parts of the brain and memory and our ability to be there and be present, our ability to learn, our ability to take new information in. And as a result, we don't get what we need to get. Say we're really stressed at school and I'm really overwhelmed and I'm trying to learn this new thing, but I can't take information in because I'm so anxious. I don't lay the new memory down, and then I feel like a failure. And now I've got a shame loop on top of the anxiety that I originally had, and maybe teachers telling me that I need to focus and pay more attention and not understanding why I can't get it. And here it's because my brain has been overloaded with the stress that my body is feeling. In addition, when we've got trauma, so back to our brain and our body, we store memory in different places in our brain. And in a healthy memory, we've got all sorts of memory pieces and they're all connected. So if you think about what you had for breakfast this morning, you pulled all that information from different parts of your brain and it came together in a visual, maybe, or an idea, and you know what you had for breakfast, you know who you were with, you know what was on TV if you were watching TV, or the radio if you were listening to the radio, what other sounds, maybe you were listening to birds, what the smells were in the environment, maybe conversation that you had with another person. So you bring all that from different parts of your brain together, and we call that a hot brain. In trauma, what happens is they're not connected. They get fragmented because the brain is too overwhelmed and there's no connection between them. And so when we think about maybe there was an attack that I experienced and I'm walking down the street a few months later or a year later or 20 years later and I see the same color blue jacket, but I can't connect these dots to say, oh, that was in a different city. I can only see the blue jacket. It hijacks my brainstem down here for fear. Here comes my window of tolerance, my stress with the 4 F's. I instantly make decisions, and suddenly when I realize what's happened, I'm 10 blocks away from where I thought I was going to be. I don't really know how I got here. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling maybe a lot of stress. And part of that's because the pieces that could have told me that this wasn't the same situation as it was the last time I was in trouble aren't connected up. And so again, in therapy, part of what we do is we go in using the window of tolerance work and we connect these and pull them together. So now the memory can be what it needs to be and it can be filed away in the right part of our life. And to do this, we don't have to tell the story. So many people will avoid therapy for trauma work because they're afraid they're going to have to rehash really ugly, painful, horrible details. And in reality, we don't. So there's lots of ways we can go after those memories without ever telling the story. That helps release the stress on the body. It helps with widening our window of tolerance. It helps us be more present in the world. It helps us get more socially engaged, utilizing what's called the social engagement system so that we can feel more connected, which we talked about earlier, really helps the brain because as humans, we need other humans. We need to feel safe if we're actually going to do self-growth and actualization of our lives and be the best people we can be. We need to know that we're beyond just surviving our environment and we really are at a place of thriving. And that takes safety in our world. So we've got to work towards that. Looking at my little agenda here. So there can be lots of different triggers from memory, from sight, sound, smells, depending on where it's stored. And again, that trauma loop, that loops in the body, one of the things that happens is rather than feeling like, oh, I can have an event in my life, this happened when I was 6, then this thing happened when I was 10, then this happened when I was 20. Part of what trauma does is it gets stuck. So this thing that happened when I was 6, I keep feeling like it's happening over and over and over. And part of that is because when we look at where the brain takes in some of this information, on the right side of the brain, we don't have the same ability to recognize time. And that's often where we will see trauma stuff get stuck, is on this right side of the brain here. It gets stuck. It loops, it loops, it loops. We think it's happening over and over. We narrow our window. Our life gets smaller. Our ability to cope gets smaller because our emotions are so intense that we feel like we're all over the map and we can't control that, called emotional lability. And now we're kind of stuck in our life and we're afraid to move on or move out. So part of what we see in some of the research when we do trauma is that by taking, if we were to take a simplistic view that the brain has these two hemispheres and one side does the certain things and the other side does other certain things, part of what we see is that the activation in a trauma loop happens on the side that doesn't really understand or know about time. And it ends up happening over and over and over because the brain hasn't processed it all the way through. Through the therapies, we move it to the other side of the brain, so to speak, and we end up being able to have more of a narration of it, a story of it. That happened to me when I was 6. It's not still happening, and then when I was 10, this thing happened, and then when I was 20, that thing happened, and we can put it in the right chapter of our lives. And we'll start to see when we look at live brains, when we're doing these research studies, we can start to see certain things lighting up more on the side of the brain that does the meaning, has a sense of timing, has a sense of linear time, understands that that's something that happened, it's not happening now. And that usually is associated more with the left side of our brain. So from that, how does exercise help us? Well, one of the things that is pretty cool about the body and the brain is that the body, the right side of the body is controlled by the left side of the brain, and the left side of the body is controlled by the right side of the brain. So when we think about what happens when we exercise, we have to do things what are called bilateral. So if I think about my body being split right down the middle, and I have a left side and I have a left side and a right side, what happens is when I move my left arm, the right side of my brain is in control. When I move my right arm, the left side is in control. When I do bilateral movement, it brings the hemispheres of the brain together. All exercise is bilateral in nature. When I can do bilateral movement, it helps settle down the brain so that I can move some of those memories from one side of the brain to the other. And so by doing things, I don't remember what I was going to write there, by doing things like walking, like swimming, like some of our high intensity training programs. They get us to move in multiple planes. And the body, we move in basically 3 planes of movement, and we want to be doing all those planes every day. So we have our sagittal plane, we have a frontal plane, and then we have a horizontal or transverse plane. And when I can do that, I'm moving the body through these different planes of movement. I'm allowing both hemispheres of the brain to connect together, work together. And then if I'm also doing that while I'm doing some trauma work, I'm allowing things to come together so that my brain and my trauma responses can settle down. The other thing that happens in exercise is often we're doing something that's harder than we're used to. We call that overload in exercise. So my heart rate goes up, right? My breathing goes up. These two things are tied together, by the way. And typically, I will metabolize out stress hormones. So I will use up things like cortisol, adrenaline, as a result of my exercise alone. Because exercise itself creates a stress response, and then it also helps us metabolize those out in a way that's not as damaging to the body, like when we're dealing with them coursing through the body without metabolizing, and now inflammation rates are rising, impacting joint pain, impacting heart, coronary heart disease. The other thing that often will help with exercise as we move through planes is I can control my intensity. So I just was talking about the breathing and the heart rate. And so part of what happens is as I breathe, it's tied to my heart rate. And so if I slow my breathing down, I will also slow my heart rate down. If I slow my heart rate down, I will slow my breathing down. So if you want to cut a panic attack out, just do something to breathe deeply. And if it can be really helpful to look up where the ceiling meets the wall, inhale deeply to a count of 3. Inhale 1, 2, 3, then exhale 1, 2, 3. Repeat that 3 to 5 times, and you're going to elicit another set of chemicals called the relaxation response. Those chemicals and your stress chemicals don't exist together. So as the relaxation ones rise, your stress will lower. The other things you can do if you're feeling stressed in the moment is just put some pressure right here. When you put pressure right here, right at that third eye place between the eyebrows, and you hold and you maybe close your eyes and breathe, your heart rate again lowers. This lowers your heart rate. It's part of why child's pose works. Lowers your heart rate, your breathing rate lowers, and now your body doesn't feel like you're under such stress. One of the other things that exercise really helps out with, so if we look at how our neurons are, we've got these things. So in here is the synapse. And if I have, say I have a neural pathway for, this would be for speaking Spanish. I don't speak Spanish very well. This is for English. This is really close together, right? This one is not. So in order for me to do Spanish words, I have to think a little harder. I have to work a little harder. So part of what happens when I'm doing exercise patterns, especially if I'm doing things, and this is any new learning, I'm asking my body to think a little harder in the new direction. And when I do that over time, say I move to Mexico where I'm immersed in Spanish, what'll happen is this will actually begin to be this direction, and this will get closer, and this one I don't use so much gets further away. So if you think about this one, the original, as negative thinking, I'm so stupid and I think that about 1,000 times a day, I'm creating a very strong neural pathway for negative self-talk. And then I try to pump in, I'm okay, I'm doing okay, and it feels real icky and it doesn't feel real and I have to fake it a while. Part of what I want to do is do it anyway, because over time I will change the neural pathway, and now the neural pathway for positive thinking becomes the stronger one. The one for negative gets further apart. When we exercise, we're creating new neural pathways, helping our body learn new skills. So when I use exercise to treat trauma, I might be holding space for that window of tolerance. Remember, the window of tolerance can feel like you're a little bit out of control when you're pushing the edges. And so I might use high intensity training to push this window up and to keep people here with breathing and heart rate, stress hormones, and then introduce a way to relax and bring them down without tipping them out into numbing, so that they're able to just be okay with what went on. And that way, keeping one foot in the present while we're working on past stuff, we can allow that window of tolerance to widen up while creating new learning of I'm strong, I'm able, I'm powerful, I'm ready, I can handle my life, it's going to be okay, I can get through this, I have skills, I know where to turn. All those positive thinking things that we call resourcing or coping can be built in an exercise program as well. And exercise dosing. So the last couple of things, exercise dosing. So one of the amazing things that pharmaceutical companies will never tell you is exercise has been shown in studies to treat anxiety, depression, trauma, bipolar, schizophrenia, with as little as 30 minutes of aerobic activity 2 times a week. That's it. Now, it's not an end-all be-all. It's not necessarily a cure, and yet it helps lower symptoms, sometimes for folks to the point where they don't have to be on medication any longer. So with that, 2 times a week, 30 minutes of aerobic activity at a moderate intensity, which means that you're working somewhere between 45 and 65% of your heart rate. You could be walking, swimming, riding a bike, doing some strength training circuits, anything to raise that heart rate up to a moderate intensity for you. You'd be able to sing the alphabet, maybe, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star a couple times in a row. It's probably too light, once maybe. You could have a small conversation with your friend. That's all the harder you have to work. And you would be helping your body lower any symptoms of depression, anxiety, with some bipolar schizophrenia stuff. You could maybe see some benefits just by exercising twice a week for only 30 minutes. And that's pretty minimal and pretty doable for most people. So that's another huge way that I use exercise to help people with their psychology and mental health. Some of the other things we want to think about are the planes of the positioning of the body. So if you look at Amy Cuddy's work, you can see her TED Talk. She talks about posture, and she talks about what happens to our posture. So if I stand like this, I'm increasing my testosterone and I'm lowering my cortisol. If I do this, I'm increasing my cortisol and lowering my testosterone. And so with our body positioning, we can feel more powerful in the world. We can impact our mood and our mental health and change how we think and how we feel about ourselves in the world, how we feel about the world around ourselves. And so it can be very powerful. And again, exercise, I use that a lot when I'm looking at posturing, looking at where energy might be stuck in the body. I can look at someone and say, okay, I want to strengthen muscles to help them be more upright, to help them feel stronger through the chest, through the upper back, so that we can reduce the collapse of the chest. And that can help them decrease their cortisol, their stress, help them increase their sense of powerfulness rather than powerlessness, help them increase their hope, help them increase their ability to be in the world with strength and feel productive. So those are all ways that I work with exercise and movement, planes of the body, or planes of movement, bilateral movement of the body, to help with mental health issues. I'm just looking at my agenda I had written out. I don't see anything else on there for today. So you're welcome to reach me at either stacyreuille.com. And there you can find my dissertation was published into a book, the link between psychological trauma and physical exercise, as well as anything else that I might be writing about. I have a blog you can check out from that webpage. And then just places and resources that I really enjoy myself getting help from, as well as sending my clients to. And or you can do superiorworkout.com. This is a place I used to do online training online personal training through that website. I no longer do that. I currently work for Community Mental Health, so I'm doing my training now in person, blending exercise and psychology together, and developing ways that fitness and wellness and food and mood all go together. But you're welcome to reach me through either one of those websites, read the things on the blog, check out my book, which is available on morebooks.com, as well as the link through my website at stacyreuille.com. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I hope this was helpful.